I decided not to tell him the truth the very first week we met, long before anything between us had time to grow roots. It was not about lying, not exactly. It was about timing, about wanting to exist in a space where I could be seen without the weight of my title pressing down on every interaction. Some things change the room before you even walk into it, and what I do for a living is one of them. I had seen it happen too many times to count. People shift even when they do not realize it. Their tone changes, their posture stiffens, their curiosity turns into caution. I did not want that, not with him. When Ethan asked me what I did, I gave him the truth, just not the full version. I told him I was in the Navy. He nodded like it made sense, like it fit neatly into a box he already understood. To him, that meant routine, discipline, long hours, and maybe distance. It did not mean authority. It did not mean decisions that carried weight far beyond a single unit or base. It did not mean anything that would make him pause or reconsider how he saw me. And that was exactly what I wanted. For a while, everything felt simple. Ethan treated me with respect, but not in a way that felt cautious or calculated. Conversations flowed easily, without any kind of hidden performance. There was no need for him to impress me, and no expectation that I needed to prove anything in return. If anything, there was a quiet assumption in the background that he was slightly more established, a little more grounded in his life than I was. I noticed it early on, the subtle way he carried himself, the confidence that came from believing he was ahead. But I never corrected it, not because it bothered me, but because I wanted to see what would grow in that space. Months passed, and things between us deepened. It was not loud or dramatic, but steady. He began talking about the future in small, careful ways, like someone testing the water before stepping in fully. Then one evening, he mentioned his parents. He said they had been asking about me, and that they wanted to meet me. The way he said it carried something underneath, something that felt like evaluation wrapped in casual curiosity. I agreed without hesitation, not because I wanted to impress them, and not because I felt the need to secure anything. I agreed because I wanted to see. The night we drove to their house, I already knew what to expect the moment we entered the neighborhood. Large homes lined the street, each one carefully maintained, each detail suggesting that success had been achieved and then arranged for display. It was not excessive, but it was intentional. Ethan parked the car and glanced over at me with a slight hesitation. He told me his parents could be particular. I nodded once and told him I would be fine. I was not nervous, I was curious. Inside, the house felt controlled, not cold, not unwelcoming, but structured in a way that made everything feel deliberate. His mother, Claire, greeted us first. Her smile was polite, her eyes observant. She looked at me the way people do when they are already forming conclusions before the conversation begins. His father, Richard, followed shortly after. He said little at first, but there was a quiet attentiveness in the way he studied me. Introductions were brief, and my name settled into the room without resistance. We sat down for dinner, and the first part of the evening passed smoothly. They asked about the drive, about the weather, about general things that filled space without revealing anything meaningful. It was comfortable enough, but I could feel the shift coming. It always comes. Eventually, Richard folded his hands together and asked what I did in the Navy. The way he said it was precise, like he was narrowing the question before I even answered it. I told him I was an officer. It was the same answer I had given Ethan months earlier. Richard nodded, but it was not a full acceptance. He pointed out that there were many types of officers and asked me to be more specific. I listed a few categories in a neutral tone, keeping my answer broad without being dishonest. Claire smiled slightly and commented that it must be stable, structured work. I recognized what she was doing immediately. It was not curiosity, it was classification. The rest of the dinner followed a pattern that was subtle but consistent. Their questions sounded harmless on the surface, but each one narrowed the possibilities of who I could be in their minds. Their comments carried assumptions disguised as observations. Nothing they said was openly disrespectful, nothing that could be called out without explanation, but it was enough to define the space they believed I occupied. Ethan did not react, either he did not notice, or this dynamic felt normal to him. That realization stayed with me more than anything his parents said. At one point, Richard began talking about leadership. He spoke about experience, about responsibility, about how true authority takes time to earn. I listened quietly, recognizing the direction of the conversation. He said that most people do not encounter that level of responsibility early in their careers. I nodded and agreed with him in a general sense, because the statement itself was not wrong. But the assumption behind it was clear. He had already decided where I fit within that framework. I could have corrected him at any moment. I could have explained exactly what I did, what I was responsible for, how many people and decisions fell under my authority. But I did not. There are moments when correction does not add value, when observation reveals more than explanation ever could. This was one of those moments. The evening continued, plates were cleared, and the conversation softened slightly. Then my phone vibrated against the table. I glanced down at the screen, and the name alone told me everything I needed to know. I stood up and excused myself, stepping just far enough away to take the call without raising my voice. There was no small talk on the other end, there never is. The situation was urgent, and they needed confirmation on a deployment adjustment. I told them I would review it that night. There was a brief pause, and then I acknowledged the person on the line with their rank. The word left my mouth naturally, without thought, but it carried more weight than anything I had said all evening. When I turned back toward the table, I felt the shift immediately. It was not dramatic, not something anyone would describe as a scene, but the atmosphere had changed. Ethan was looking at me differently, not confused, but recalculating. Richard sat a little straighter, his attention sharper. Claire's expression had become more careful, more measured. I returned to my seat, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan said that I had never mentioned that part of my job. His tone was not accusing, just catching up to something he had not realized before. I told him that he had never asked. That was the truth. I had not hidden anything. I had simply allowed them to fill in the blanks themselves. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. It was heavier, more aware. Richard cleared his throat and said that my position sounded significant. I nodded and told him it came with responsibility. The same word he had used earlier, but now it landed differently. No one needed to revisit the assumptions they had made. They were already understood. The rest of the evening unfolded with a noticeable shift in tone. Their questions became more careful, their phrasing more deliberate. They gave more space to my answers, more weight to my words. It was subtle but unmistakable. And yet, none of it changed what had already been revealed. Respect that appears only after recognition is not the same as respect that exists without it. When we finally left, the air outside felt lighter, less controlled. Ethan walked beside me in silence for a few moments before speaking. He admitted that he had no idea about the full extent of what I did. I told him I knew that. He asked me why I had not told him sooner, and I took a moment before answering. I told him that I wanted to see what existed between us without it. Something that was not shaped by titles or expectations. He nodded slowly, like he understood part of it but not all of it yet. We reached the car, and he opened the door before hesitating. He said his parents had not meant anything by their behavior. I looked at him for a moment and told him that I was not sure that was the point. Because intention does not erase instinct. It does not change what comes naturally when people believe they are evaluating someone on equal ground. He did not argue with me, and I did not explain further. There was nothing left to clarify. The answers had already been given long before anyone knew who I really was.